Mortal Kombat wasn't just a movie, it was a gamble with everything on the line. But behind the fights and the fireballs, it was survival in the arena. Stars who walked away before the cameras rolled, stunts that left real bruises, and storms, heat, and politics that tried to finish the fight. These are 20 weird facts about Mortal Kombat, and hidden inside the blood and the shadows, it was the video game curse turned into legend. Every fight was a test, and this one earned immortality. Number 1. Before Mortal Kombat was even a game, it was a dream pitch built around one man, Jean-Claude Van Damme. Midway's developers imagined a digitized fighter with his roundhouse kicks, his splits, his Hollywood charm, a movie star turned arcade icon. The deal almost happened. Van Damme met with the team, talks got serious, but negotiations collapsed, and the dream died. The developers didn't abandon him, they transformed him. Out of the ashes came Johnny Cage, a parody of Van Damme himself. Cage was arrogant, vain, and deadly, the fighter who signed autographs after finishing his opponents. His trademark split punch pulled straight from Van Damme's filmography. The character became both tribute and inside joke, a reminder of what might have been. Years later, irony knocked again. When New Line was casting the movie, Van Damme was offered the role of Johnny Cage, the character modeled after him, but this time he turned it down to headline Street Fighter. The result? The role built for him slipped through his fingers twice, and the ultimate martial arts parody became a legend without its original star. Number 2. Casting Mortal Kombat was less like filling a roster and more like surviving a tournament of Hollywood names. Whispers floated that Johnny Depp or even Tom Cruise were considered for Johnny Cage before the part landed with Lyndon Ashby, a relative unknown who swaggered into the role with just enough charm and arrogance to make Cage his own. The surprises didn't stop there. For Raiden, the studio's dream choice was Sean Connery, still riding high on his post-Bond gravitas. But Connery declined, unwilling to spend months on a fantasy shoot in Thailand. That left the role to Christopher Lambert, who brought a mischievous grin and strange charisma, a choice that linked him forever to two cult franchises, Highlander and Mortal Kombat. Other shifts came with heartbreak. Stuntman Steve James was cast as Jax, but died tragically before production began, forcing the part to be recast with Gregory McKinney. Fans later imagined Brandon Lee might have embodied Liu Kang, though fate gave the role to Robin Shou, and he turned it into his legacy. Even behind the scenes, the cast carried legends. Co-creator Ed Boon himself provided Scorpion's iconic "Get over here."
Get over here!
While veteran voice actor Frank Welker snarled as both Reptile and Shao Kahn. The final lineup may not have been what the studio first imagined, but it fit the chaos of the franchise perfectly. Casting wasn't just a process, it was its own battle royale, fought long before the cameras ever rolled. Number 3. Most actors walk into an audition with a script and a handshake. Cary Hiroyuki Tagawa walked in like he already owned the realm. He arrived in full costume, climbed onto a chair to tower over the producers, and unleashed his lines as if he were summoning fire from the floor. It wasn't polite, it wasn't subtle, it was domination. The room fell silent. He didn't just deliver dialogue, he commanded it, turning a cold audition space into Outworld itself. The casting team didn't bother to debate. In that instant, they knew. Tagawa wasn't playing Shang Tsung, he was Shang Tsung, and the words he spat in that room, like a curse thrown across the ages, would carry all the way to the screen. Number 4. Sonya Blade wasn't supposed to be Bridget Wilson. She had auditioned first, but when delays pushed the film back, she moved on to Billy Madison. The studio pivoted fast, locking in Cameron Diaz, fresh off the mask, and glowing with star power. She began martial arts training, but just weeks before filming, disaster struck. Diaz fractured her wrist. In a movie defined by combat, there was no way around it. She was out. That's when fate spun back to Bridget Wilson. With Billy Madison just wrapped, she was called to set with almost no prep time. She hadn't trained, she hadn't rehearsed. She learned fight choreography on the fly, practicing between takes and improvising through pain. During one stunt, she dislocated her shoulder, but instead of stopping, she reset and kept going, determined not to lose the role twice. Sonya Blade was forged not by careful design, but by chaos. What could have been a setback turned into a defining performance, one carried by grit, bruises, and stubborn resolve. On screen, she fought like she had something to prove, because behind the camera, she did. Number 5. When Mortal Kombat 2 lit up arcades, producer Lawrence Kasanoff saw more than a quarter-eating brawler. He saw a cinematic goldmine, a chance to merge myth, martial arts, and and spectacle into what he called Star Wars meets Enter the Dragon. But Hollywood had no faith. Super Mario Bros. Had just tanked, and the phrase video game movie was already a punchline. New Line executives laughed when he pitched it. Studios rolled their eyes. But Kasanoff refused to let go. He argued the characters had archetypal power, that the violence could be stylized, and that the fan base was already massive. He promised spectacle, world building, and a soundtrack that could shake theaters. Against every warning, he wore the studio down until they said yes. And what began as a long-shot bet became one of the most surprising box office victories of the decade. Number 6. Mortal Kombat didn't just film on sound stages. It sprawled across continents. Outworld's ruins came from a steel mill in Fontana, California, while the mystical temples were shot in Thailand, so remote that cast and crew hauled equipment by canoes through humid jungles. The payoff looked exotic on screen, but behind the camera, survival came first. Actors and crew battled brutal heat, clouds of mosquitoes, and waves of food poisoning that dropped people mid-shoot. Robin Show recalled entire days lost as half the team collapsed from illness. Scenes meant to play like effortless fantasy were often filmed between sick breaks and heat exhaustion. It looked like martial arts magic, but off-screen it was closer to an endurance trial, one that tested whether the crew could make it through the film at all. Number 7. Before CGI dominance, Mortal Kombat's ultimate boss wasn't pixels, it was machinery. Goro, the four-armed prince, was a $1 million animatronic puppet that took 16 puppeteers to operate. Every gesture, from a twitching eyelid to a clenched fist, required coordination like a ballet of wires and hydraulics. But the technology buckled under pressure. Limbs froze mid-punch, motors overheated, and hours were wasted coaxing him into motion. Actors often had to improvise as the towering puppet glitched, its terrifying presence undercut by constant breakdowns. Much of his screen time was slashed in editing, but fans never forgot the beast. Goro became both a triumph and a cautionary tale, the most ambitious animatronic since Jabba the Hutt, and just as difficult to keep alive. Number 8. The fights in Mortal Kombat weren't just staged illusions, they left scars. Robin Show cracked his ribs while battling Reptile, finishing the scene through gritted teeth before admitting the injury later. Bridget Wilson dislocated her shoulder, but instead of halting production, she reset, iced it, and returned to throw punches. Lyndon Ashby, as Johnny Cage, bruised his kidneys after Scorpion slammed him against stone pillars. For all its PG-13 limitations, the film still drew blood, just not the kind that made it to the screen. The choreography was brutal, the schedule relentless, and stunt doubles were often sidelined so actors could sell the realism. On screen, it looked like fantasy combat. Off screen, it was a grind of bruises, fractures, and bodies pushed beyond safe limits. Number 9. Reptile wasn't in the script. He wasn't in the schedule. He was a panic button. When test audiences said more fights, the studio scrambled and demanded another showdown on the spot. Sets were cobbled together. CGI lizard effects were rushed. Robin Show and his stunt team were shoved into grueling rehearsals with no prep. The result was chaos. Actors slammed into stone walls, bruised through endless retakes, and fought exhaustion just to keep up with the new choreography. What should have been a throwaway patch nearly broke them, but instead it became lightning in a bottle. That frantic last-minute scramble didn't just plug a hole. It gave fans one of the movie's most jaw-dropping fights. Reptile wasn't born from planning. He was born from chaos, and somehow chaos made him immortal. Number 10. Mortal Kombat never pretended to be faithful with casting. A Japanese thunder god came to life through French star Christopher Lambert. Sub-Zero was played by a French martial artist. Scorpion, an American stuntman behind the mask. For purists, it looked like a mess. Asia's mythic warriors filtered through a Western lens. But in truth, it wasn't far from the source. The original arcade games had done the same, with Chicago actors donning ninja costumes to become legends. Authentic? No. Effective? Absolutely. In 1995, fans didn't line up for perfect heritage. They came for fighters who could move, smirk, and sell the spectacle. Mortal Kombat's mismatched casting may look dated now, but at the time it carried the right spirit and turned digital myth into living flesh. Number 11. On paper, the first draft of Mortal Kombat looked exactly like the arcade game. Brutal fatalities, geysers of blood, R-rated profanity. But Washington had already declared war. In 1993, Senator Joseph Lieberman held hearings blasting the game as corrupting America's kids, teaching them how to rip off heads. The outrage was so fierce, it birthed the ESRB rating system. By the time cameras rolled, the franchise wasn't just entertainment. It was a political target. New Line panicked. Executives demanded a PG-13 cut, terrified an R rating would sink ticket sales and invite more Senate scrutiny. Out went the gore. Out went the F-bombs. Even on remote temple sets in Thailand, the crew knew they were making a sanitized version of the world's goriest game. The irony was sharp. The game was built on blood, and the movie couldn't spill a drop. drop. What it lost in brutality, it gained in reach. Families could buy tickets. Teenagers could sneak in. The box office swelled. But buried under every punch and kick was a reminder that politicians had already shaped the fight. Mortal Kombat didn't just survive censorship, it proved victory could come without a fatality. Number 12. The film's style wasn't pulled from thin air. Long before cameras rolled, co-creator John Tobias admitted he'd borrowed heavily from John Carpenter's Big Trouble in Little China. Its villains, the lightning-wielding Three Storms and the ancient sorcerer Lo Pan, became the DNA for Raiden and Shang Tsung. Director Paul W.S. Anderson leaned into that connection. Raiden's swagger, Shang Tsung's robes, even the fusion of martial arts, mysticism, and camp humor felt like Carpenter's world, reskinned for a new generation. By 1995, audiences felt déjà vu in every bolt of lightning and every villain's grin. What started as homage became the film's aesthetic core, a mashup of East and West, myth and parody that made Mortal Kombat look like Mortal Kombat. Number 13. When the fights ended, the soundtrack kept swinging. George S. Clinton composed a mix of orchestral swells and electronic beats, but it was the Immortals' techno syndrome that detonated into pop culture. Record labels thought it was too strange to sell. MTV disagreed. They blasted it daily, while arcades piped it through speakers until kids could chant Mortal Kombat in their sleep. The single went platinum, becoming one of the few video game songs to break into mainstream charts. On screen, fists flew. In clubs, it was bass drops and battle cries. And for an entire generation, the film's most lasting legacy wasn't just Scorpion or Sub-Zero. It was the techno anthem that still makes dance floors feel like arenas. Number 14. The movie didn't have to fight over its name. The legend was already written years earlier in the arcade. Back when the game was still in development, the team argued for 6 months over what to call it. Kumite, Dragon Attack, Fatality. Every idea hit the wall. Nothing stuck. Then pinball designer Steve Ritchie wandered into Ed Boon's office, saw the word combat misspelled on a whiteboard, and laughed. Why not Mortal Kombat? The room froze. It was perfect. One word that carried danger, destiny, and just enough rebellion to feel forbidden. By 1995, the movie didn't invent a title. It inherited a war cry, a single typo that turned into one of the most iconic names in pop culture history. Number 15. Mortal Kombat wasn't expected to dominate. Video game movies were a joke. Super Mario Bros. Had just bombed, and critics thought this one would sink too. But in August 1995, the tournament spilled onto screens with a $20 million budget and a roar loud enough to shake Hollywood. It opened at number 1 with $23 million, holding the crown for 3 straight weeks. By the end of its run, it had pulled in $122 million worldwide, a staggering number for a genre no one believed in. Audiences lined up not for dialogue or depth, but for the spectacle. Scorpion's chains, Goro's menace, that pounding techno theme. The irony was sharp. What critics dismissed as camp ended up being historic. Mortal Kombat wasn't just a movie. It was the first real box office victory in the war to make video games cinematic. Number 16. When Mortal Kombat hit theaters, critics pounced. They mocked the dialogue, laughed at the acting, and dismissed the story as a video game stretched too thin. Reviews called it loud, silly, and disposable. Another cash grab in a doomed genre. But fans didn't care. They weren't there for Shakespeare. They came for the fights, the spectacle, and that thunderous techno beat. Kids blasted Mortal Kombat from boomboxes. Arcades replayed the soundtrack until the walls shook. Sleepovers turned the VHS into ritual, a movie quoted line for line like a secret language. Years later, even as critics doubled down, the film refused to fade. Among video game movies, being called the least bad was a crown. Fans embraced it, not as a guilty pleasure, but as their cult classic, born from rejection and kept alive by devotion. Number 17. Before Mortal Kombat, Paul W.S. Anderson was a British indie filmmaker with just one cult movie under his belt, Shopping. Hardly anyone in Hollywood knew his name, but when New Line needed a director who could stretch a $20 million budget into something big and loud, Anderson convinced them he could turn a video game into spectacle. The gamble paid off. His use of practical locations in Thailand, wild camera angles, and relentless fight choreography gave the film an energy that critics dismissed, but audiences devoured. Suddenly, the unknown outsider was the face of a box office hit. From that moment, Anderson became Hollywood's go-to for genre franchises. Within a few years, he was steering Resident Evil for 2 decades, turning it into one of the longest-running video game series on screen. All of it, the monsters, the sequels, the billion-dollar franchise, started with Scorpion, Sub-Zero, and a movie nobody thought would work. Number 18. Mortal Kombat didn't just stop at theaters. It erupted into Saturday mornings. The film's success unleashed a wave of spin-offs that tried to keep the energy alive. First came The Journey Begins, an animated prequel rushed out on VHS to cash in, mixing crude CGI with hand-drawn fights. fights. Then came Defenders of the Realm, a short-lived cartoon where Earth's heroes fought weekly invasions, with none of the gore that made the game famous. And it didn't end there. Mortal Kombat: Conquest, a live-action TV prequel, stretched the mythology into a martial arts soap opera. Novelizations filled shelves, toys hit stores, and even breakfast cereal commercials echoed the battle cry. It wasn't always polished. Some spin-offs were clumsy, some forgotten, but together they showed how unstoppable the brand had become. Mortal Kombat wasn't just a movie anymore. It was a universe, one that spilled into every screen, every aisle, every living room. Number 19. Not every cut from Mortal Kombat was about fights. Some of it was about love. Robin Show revealed that Liu Kang and Princess Kitana were originally written to share a deeper romance. Early drafts gave them stolen glances, longer scenes together, and even a kiss that hinted at something beyond destiny. But the studio grew nervous. Executives feared that tenderness would slow down the action, so one by one, the romantic beats disappeared. By the final cut, their connection was reduced to vague hints and silent understanding. The irony? Both Kitana and Shang Tsung had appeared in the James Bond film License to Kill, a franchise built on love and danger. Here, though, the passion was erased, leaving only fireballs and fate. Mortal Kombat's deadliest battle wasn't in Outworld. It was the fight to keep a little humanity alive between the punches. Number 20. The first Mortal Kombat shocked everyone. A video game movie that actually worked. It made money, built a fandom, and gave the genre hope. So when New Line rushed out a sequel, expectations were high. What fans got was Mortal Kombat: Annihilation, and the fallout was brutal. Actors were recast. Beloved characters were killed off in seconds. The story collapsed under cheap effects and breakneck pacing that felt more like a rushed arcade demo than a movie. What had once looked sleek and dangerous now looked like a Saturday morning parody. Fans who had cheered in 1995 left theaters stunned, not by awe, but by disappointment. The failure left scars. For years, Annihilation became shorthand for how fast a franchise could implode. The shadow of the original only made the sequels stumble more glaring. Mortal Kombat had won the tournament once, but this time, it was a flawless defeat. Bonus fact: for kids in 1995, Mortal Kombat wasn't just a movie, it was a rite of passage. VHS tapes wore thin from rewinds. Playgrounds echoed with cries of, "Finish him." Techno beats rattled bedroom walls until parents begged for mercy. Critics sneered, but kids didn't care. They weren't watching for story. They were watching for the moment Sub-Zero froze a man solid, or Scorpion dragged someone into hellfire. Those scenes became legend. And every reboot, every meme, every shout of the title theme still carries that echo. The summer when a video game movie finally felt like victory. Mortal Kombat wasn't Shakespeare. It wasn't subtle. It was fists, flames, and techno turned up too loud. And that's exactly why it survived. Critics dismissed it. Sequels embarrassed it. But the movie lives on, as the one that proved a video game adaptation could break through. If you still hear that theme blasting in your head, drop a comment. Tell us what legendary fight we should step into next. Because some films don't just play. They keep shouting through the decades. Finish him.